Welcome back to the first annual Halloween special. Today we're going to learn how to play the 3 to 6 player semi-cooperative adventure game Betrayal at House on the Hill by Bruce Glassco, Rob Daviau, Bill McQuillan, Mike Selinker, and Teeuwynn Woodruff, and published by Wizards of the Coast and Avalon Hill. One clarification I need to make, however, is that this tutorial is going to teach the rules for the 2nd edition of the game, not the 3rd edition that was released in 2022. In Betrayal at House on the Hill, the players take the roles of a group of characters forming a party that found a creepy abandoned house on the hill. And as naturally as you would do when you find an abandoned house, you go inside and look for adventure, because nothing could possibly go wrong. And that's exactly what you're gonna do. You're going to be discovering the house room by room, having weird encounters, and finding interesting things right up until somebody turns against the group, and then it becomes a race to defeat the traitor and anyone who supports him before it's too late. Let's get to the table and let's see what's in the box. To set up the game, take the Secrets of Survival and the Traitor's Tome books and set them aside for now. You'll use them later on when the game reaches the haunt phase. Then have each player select a character and collect the matching standee for those characters. Any characters that are not picked can be returned to the box along with their standees. They will not be used for this game. Then have each player, with the characters they have chosen, choose which side of the character they would like to play as. There are 2 sides to each character, and they come with various stats that you will need to know. Each stat is a certain amount of dice that you will be able to roll in order to do a check for each of your different traits, and they have a max amount for each one, as well as a starting amount for each one listed here in green. Then take the little sliders that the game will provide you with and slide them onto your little character sheet to where the green starting number for each of your traits will be. Take all of the event, item, and omen cards that come with the game, shuffle them, and then place them all face down in their respective decks. Find the upper landing, the 3 starting ground tiles, and the basement landing, and place them relatively far apart from each other. These are the starting areas for the 3 floors of the house that you will be exploring. For the sake of fitting everything into the camera, I've decided to place them relatively closer to each other. The rest of the room tiles, you can simply shuffle them together and place them face down nearby. And you don't need to worry about which floor is showing on the back of the tiles. Each player then takes their standee and places it at the entrance hall on the ground floor. All the remaining tokens and all the dice can be set aside for now. They will all come into play later on. Finally, you'll determine who goes first. Each character that is in the game has a birthday listed on their character sheet, and whoever's birthday is closest to the day on which you are playing the game that has not already happened yet will go first. Find out whose birthday that is, and that player will be the starting player, and then you are ready to begin. On your turn, you can do any of the following actions in any order that you choose. You can move your explorer from one room to another room. You can have your explorer discover a new room. You can use item or omen cards that you've collected. You can attempt a die roll, or you can make an attack on another player. Keep in mind, you can only attack a player once per turn, and you can only attack a player after the haunt has started. To move your character, simply look at the speed stat on your character, and whatever the arrow is pointing to is your current movement. That means that you can move that many spaces throughout the house. For example, Father Reinhardt has a starting speed of 3. That means he can move into 3 rooms for his turn. For example, he could move 1, 2, 3. He can move 1, 2, 3, or he can move 1, to 3 if he really wanted to. When moving, you are allowed to do other actions such as using items or attacking when you are in the middle of your movement. However, if the game would require you to draw a card for any reason, you must stop moving for the rest of your turn. To discover a new room, simply move your character through a door that does not have a room on the other side. Then draw tiles from the top of the stack until you find one that reads the level that you are currently on. For example, this tile says ground floor, which you are currently on right now. So that means you can take this tile, flip it over, and attach it to the room that you went through. Once you connect it to the door that you went through, you immediately move into that room. Anytime you add a new room to the house, you must add it as logically as you can. For example, this room only has one door, but this room has 2 doors. And if it is impossible to connect all of the doors in the room to each other, then you will simply be able to have them create a fake door, also known as a false feature. If the room that you have moved into does not have any symbols in the bottom right corner, then you may continue moving if you have any extra movement left. However, if the room that you moved into has a symbol on it, you immediately stop moving for the rest of your turn and you will draw the corresponding card. There are 3 types of cards in the game: events, items, and omens. Events are, quite simply, events that will happen in a room that will happen to you, and most often they will require you to attempt some form of roll. For example, this card will give you an option if you want to attempt a knowledge roll. Items are just that. They are items that you find that can help you during the game. When you find an item, you'll take that item, put it in front of you, and that is now yours until you are forced to discard it. Omens, however, can either be an item, an event, or even a companion that will travel with you once you find them. And it's similar to the events and the items. However, at the end of every single omen card, they require you to make a haunt roll. Making a haunt roll is absolutely mandatory. It is not optional. To make a haunt roll, you will roll 6 dice, and if the amount you've rolled is equal to or greater than the total number of omen cards that have been found, you may continue exploring without issue. However, if you ended up rolling less than the amount of omen cards that are out there, the game will then move into its second phase, the haunt, which I will get to later. Several rooms are known as special rooms, and they actually have printed text on their tiles that will summarize their effects. Most of the rooms will also have additional rules that I will get to later because there actually requires further explanation. The rooms that require a further explanation will have an asterisk printed next to their name. There are several types of special rooms, and I'll go over each of those special types now. The vault, chasm, catacombs, and tower are all considered barrier rooms. What these mean is that these rooms are actually divided into 2 parts and can actually stop you from moving to the other side of the room. Crossing the barrier will require you to pass a check of some form using one of your traits. You can attempt this roll once during your turn. If you succeed, however, you will cross over the barrier. Now, crossing the barrier does not count as one of your movements. If you fail the roll, however, your movement immediately ends. On your next turn, however, you can attempt the roll again to cross, or you can go back the way you came. There are a couple things important that you need to note. 1. The explorers cannot interact with each other in any way, whether it's attacking or simple interaction, if they are in the same room but on opposite sides of the barrier. Monsters that are in these rooms, however, always ignore the barrier. However, if a monster were to end its movement in the barrier, the traitor gets to decide which side of the barrier that the monster is on. If a tile effect, such as the collapsed room or a card effect, such as the secret passage, would cause you to land in a barrier room, you get to decide which side of the barrier that you end up on. If the arrival requires a token to be placed in that new room, such as the collapsed room or the secret stairs like I just showed you, then that associated token is now permanently on that side of the barrier. The vault is a special case because you don't actually move across the vault if you attempt a challenge. In order to actually complete this challenge, you attempt a knowledge roll, and if you manage to succeed in the knowledge roll, you can collect the benefits on the other side of the vault. If you were to do that, you will then place the empty vault token on the other side so that everybody knows that the vault is empty. Anytime you were to enter the coal chute, you immediately slide to the basement landing. One thing to note is that entering the coal chute and sliding into the basement all count as one movement, and you cannot end your turn on the coal chute. The first time a player discovers the collapsed room, they immediately must make the speed check according to the tile. If you manage to make the speed check, you can stay on that tile. If you fail that speed check, you will draw a random basement tile from the stack and you will put it into play. That player then immediately moves to that tile and will suffer 1 die of physical damage. The characters have their 4 sheets like I showed you, but they're divided into 2 sides. The speed and might are considered to be physical, and the sanity and knowledge are considered to be mental. So if an effect would require you to take a die or a point of physical damage, you will apply that to either your speed or your might or any combination. If you are required to take a point or die of mental damage, then you will apply that to your sanity, knowledge, or the combinations. If you are required to take a die of a certain type of damage, you will simply roll that die, and whatever you roll, you apply that to whichever side that you have to take the damage on. One thing to keep in mind is that only the first player that falls through the collapsed room onto the basement tile that is drawn is the one who actually draws and places the basement tile. Anyone else who falls through the collapsed room immediately just goes to the tile that was placed. To let everybody know that this is the tile that was placed when you fell through the collapsed room, place the below collapsed room token on that tile so that everybody knows that if you fall through the collapsed room, that is the tile where you end up in. Any explorers that enter the collapsed room after that can actually ignore the room's ability or intentionally use it to get to the basement. However, if you do choose to use the ability to get to the basement, it does not count as moving a space, but the player still takes the damage. If the first character that enters the collapsed room is a monster, however, instead of drawing a new tile, simply just choose an existing tile that is in the basement and put the monster there instead. The junk room and the graveyard will require you to attempt a roll of a certain trait when you attempt to leave. An important note specifically to the junk room is that if this room would lower your speed when you exit, and your new speed would mean you don't have enough movement left to leave, you would still make it out. You would simply just be in the room adjacent to the junk room. Keep in mind that rule of the speed only applies to the junk room. It does not apply to the graveyard because the consequence of failing the junk room is speed, which is how you move. The consequence for failing the graveyard is knowledge. So you don't have to worry about not being able to leave the graveyard since you're not losing speed for it. Whenever a player or a monster controlled by the traitor or the traitor themselves move into the mystic elevator, it immediately will move. Simply just roll 2 dice and simply place the elevator wherever it is according to the results that you've rolled. If there is not an appropriate place that the elevator can move based on the results that you've rolled, simply leave the elevator where it is. If the dice you rolled is already what the floor of the mystic elevator is on, then you can move the elevator to any other door that is on that floor, except for the tile that it was already connected to before you moved it. Keep in mind, however, you can only move the Mystic Elevator once per turn. Monsters and the Traitor, however, can both use the elevator and go wherever they want without having to roll. However, the elevator still only moves once during the Traitor and Monster's entire set of turns. For example, if the Traitor were to use the elevator, the Monster cannot on the same turn go into the elevator and move it again. An important thing to note is that when discovering a room, you cannot place a tile that would intentionally seal off an entire floor. If you were to draw a tile that would cause that, you simply discard the tile and you will draw a new one to replace it that you will move into. If all of the remaining tiles that are in the game would result in the floor being sealed off, the player whose turn it is must rearrange the tiles in such a way that would open the tiles up, so that there would be free doorways. If a roll for a Mystic Elevator would cause the elevator to completely seal off the floor, then the elevator does not move from its previous location. If you ever go through the whole stack of room tiles, simply shuffle all the ones that were not placed and place them face down to form a new stack. If you run out of rooms for one of the floors, you cannot discover any more rooms on that floor. You have found them all. As I said before, some rooms have these symbols on them, and if you first discover a room with the symbol, you will draw the corresponding card. What you do with the cards, however, depend on which card that you draw. If you have to draw an event card, you draw the top event card, read the card out loud, follow all of its instructions, and then you will simply discard it. If you have to draw an item card, draw the item card, read it out loud, and then place that card in front of you. You are now in possession of that card. If you have to draw an omen card, draw the omen card, read it out loud, do whatever the card says, and then place that in front of you as well. If you end up discovering a new tile due to a card or tile's effect, then you will draw a card to the corresponding tile if that tile has a symbol on it. If a tile is added by some other means, for instance a setting up for the haunt scenario, the first player who enters that room does not draw a card. And even though your movement does end if you have to draw a card, you can take other actions on your turn, such as using an item. All explorers and even some monsters are capable of using items. Most of the omen cards that are in the game are treated as an item. Once during your turn, an explorer that is carrying an item can do each of the following. They can trade an item with another player, they can drop an item onto the floor, they could pick an item off the floor, they could steal an item after an attack, or they could simply use the item. To use an item, simply pick out which item you would like to use and follow the instructions on the card. If you and another explorer are in the same room as each other, you can simply take an item and hand it to the other explorer that is in the room with you. If you would like to drop an item into a room, take one of the item tokens and place it on the item that you wish to drop. Take another one of those item tokens and place it in the room that you are dropping the item in. If you would like to drop multiple items at the same time, instead of placing an item token, you will take all of the items, put them together, and place an item pile token onto the room that you would like to drop all your items in. And instead of having just an item token, place an item pile token on top of the stack of items that you are dropping. This means that any player, including you, can actually go back and pick up any of the items. If you would like to pick up an item, simply just remove the item token from both the room and the item that you'd like to pick up and take the item that you've picked up into your possession. If you would like to pick up one item from a pile of items, simply select the item that you like and place it into your possession. But do not remove the item pile token, as there are still items in the pile. The item pile tokens only go away once all the items that have been dropped becomes in someone's possession. I'll get to stealing items and attempting attacks a little bit later, because both of those happen after the haunt begins. Remember, anytime a player discovers a room with an omen card, they have to draw the omen card and make a haunt roll. If the player who attempts the haunt roll ends up failing it, the game moves into the second stage, which is the haunt, and the player who failed the haunt roll becomes the haunt revealer. When the haunt is revealed, you will then open the first page of the Traitor's Tome, and this is where you'll end up with the haunt chart. This is what you are going to use to determine which scenario you will be playing through. In order to determine which haunt you'll be playing through, you will use the last omen card that was drawn when the haunt was revealed, as well as the room that the haunt was revealed in. In this example, I have the dog as the last omen card that was drawn, and the room was the junk room that the haunt was revealed in. You will then find the room that the haunt was revealed in and move over to the item that was revealed for the haunt. For example, the dog and the junk room. Move to where those intersect and you will find which haunt that you will be playing. For example, this group will be playing Haunt 46. You will then move down the list of the haunt book here to find Haunt 46, and it will reveal who the traitor of the game will be. In this case, it would be Madame Zostra or the lowest speed. If it ever says that the traitor would be the either highest or lowest trait of anything, and two or more explorers are tied in the same trait, and one of them is the haunt revealer, you will choose the haunt revealer to be the traitor. If neither player was the haunt revealer, then you choose the player who is closest to the left of the haunt revealer. If there was a traitor revealed, the traitor will then receive the Traitor's Tome. They will open up the book to whatever scenario that you will be playing in, for this example, Haunt 46, and you will then have a choice. You can either go off to a completely separate room and just read the whole thing on your own, or you can simply read the story portion of the text out loud to the group, and then privately read your own goal and rules. Whether you want to have the traitor go off into a separate room on their own, or have them stay with the group and simply just read to themselves, is completely up to you. Similarly, the heroes will receive their own book in the Secrets of Survival. They too will read the haunt that is associated with the scenario that they are playing through, reading the story behind it and their own secret rules, and secretly formulate a plan to achieve the secret goal. Each haunt scenario that involves a traitor will have an occurrence and a setup that will happen as soon as the haunt begins. There is also a small section that will tell you what you need to know about the bad guys, as well as your victory condition that you must accomplish in order to win the game. Likewise, the traitor also has a bit of setup for their own, as well as what they know about the heroes and what they need to do to win, as well as some special rules applying to the traitor, as well as some special rules that apply to the heroes. When everyone's ready, including the traitor, have the heroes and the traitor do everything the haunt tells them to do in the right now section of their respective books, and then the game resumes, starting with the player to the left of the traitor and going clockwise. Each of the heroes will then take a turn, and then once all the heroes have taken a turn, the traitor gets their turn. Once the traitor takes their turn, any monsters that are now in play that are controlled by the traitor will now take their turns. Once the monsters have taken their turn, then the first player to the left of the traitor takes their turn again, and so on. One thing to keep in mind is that the traitor and the heroes are still explorers, meaning they can all do exactly what they've done before the haunt was revealed. However, they no longer roll haunt rolls, even if they have to draw further omen cards. Another thing to keep in mind is that if an explorer, whether it is the traitor or not, has one of their stats reduced all the way to the skull on the bottom, that explorer will die. When an explorer dies, a couple things happen. First, remove the explorer's standee from the board. If that explorer had a companion, the companion will stay in the room where the explorer died. You will simply set that card that represents the companion aside, and if any other explorers then enter that room in the future, that companion automatically becomes theirs, with them taking the Omen card. If you had any items on you when you died, the items are dropped onto the floor. Similar to just dropping an item, you will put an item or item pile token in that room, as well as placing the appropriate token on the item or items that have been dropped. Any other explorers can now go to that room to pick up the items. The game ends whenever the heroes or the traitor complete their conditions listed in the You Win When section of their books. Whenever that happens, whoever completed their condition first wins the game. And that's basically it, but there's a few other things you'll need to know before playing your first game, such as restrictions before the haunt. Before the haunt starts, there are two things you cannot do. You cannot attack another explorer, and you cannot die. As stated before, there are going to be rooms that will affect your stats, causing them to go up or down. However, you cannot die before the haunt begins. If before the haunt begins, you were to suffer an effect that would take you to the skull, you will simply lower it to the lowest value above the skull. If you were already on the lowest value above the skull and you're required to lose that very same stat, you will simply keep it where it is. After the haunt starts, players can now attack each other. To attack an explorer, you must be in the same room with them, unless it's a special attack, which I will get to later. To attack someone, you will roll a certain amount of dice equal to your character's might. For example, let's say Jenny LeClark wanted to attack Madame Zostra. Jenny LeClark's current might is 4. So that means she will roll 4 dice. Madame Zostra's current might in this example is 2, so she will roll 2 dice. Whoever rolled the highest amount is the winner and inflicts physical damage on the opponent. Remember, physical damage is in terms of speed and might. In this example, LeClark had inflicted 2 physical damage against Madame Zostra, meaning Madame Zostra has to lose 2 from either her speed or her might, or could lose 1 of each. If there is a tie, nothing happens. There are also some effects that will allow you to attack with traits other than might. For example, the revolver will allow you to attack with speed, and the ring will allow you to attack with sanity. If you do make an attack with a different trait, like using the revolver, your opponent defends with the trait that you are using. If you successfully manage to attack your opponent with sanity or knowledge, you do not inflict physical damage, you inflict mental damage. Some card effects, like the revolver, allow you to attack someone from a distance, whether it is a monster or an explorer. To do so, you must have line of sight. What that means is the explorer has to be able to draw a straight line through to your target through an uninterrupted straight line of doors. In this example, Jenny would have line of sight of Madame Zostra because there are doors between all of them. In this example, however, she does not have line of sight because there is something interrupting the line of doors. So that means she would not have line of sight of Madame Zostra. If you attack somebody and inflict 2 or more points of physical damage, you can choose to steal a tradable item or omen that they have on them instead of inflicting the damage. The item or omen card will say if it cannot be traded or stolen. You also cannot steal an item or an omen by making ranged attacks. Also keep in mind, there are some haunts that have special rules for stealing items. Attacking a monster works in a similar way, except if you defeat a monster, you will only stun them, not kill them, unless a haunt specifies otherwise. You can, however, attack a stunned monster if there is other benefits to doing so, such as stealing items from it or killing it with a special item. Stunned monsters still roll dice to defend, but unlike if it's not stunned, if the attacking hero loses, they do not take damage. Monsters behave a little bit differently than in terms of explorers, especially when it comes to movement. At the start of a monster's turn, you will roll a number of dice equal to the monster's speed. For example, let's pretend this monster has a speed of 2. They will then roll 2 dice, and that will be how far they can move. For groups of the same monster type, that is how far they can move for the entire group. Most monsters cannot be killed. If a monster were to take damage, they would be stunned. As I just showed, you will take the token, you will flip it over to it showing the S side, and it will be stunned. At the end of the monster's next turn, they will then be flipped back. Basically, stunning a monster forces it to miss its next turn. Stunned monsters can also not impair an explorer's movement. For each opponent in a room after the haunt starts, an explorer or monster must use an extra point of movement to leave that room. Heroes slow the traitors and monsters, and vice versa. Just like explorers, monsters can only attack once per turn. Oftentimes they can use other traits other than might to attack, but they can't make any of the special attacks that I've talked about. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the haunt rules and the normal rules conflict with each other, simply just use the rules in the haunt. All of the normal rules are in effect unless the haunt says otherwise. There are going to be some haunts that will have a hidden traitor whose identity is secret from the group. When it calls for that, count out a number of monster tokens numbered from 1 to the amount of players playing the game, shuffle the tokens, and deal 1 out to each player face down with the stun marker showing. Whichever player got the token numbered 1 is the traitor. Play will then continue clockwise to the left of the haunt revealer. The traitor and the monsters can all ignore harmful text on a room tile. The monsters also can use the special movement options that are described on cards. However, they cannot explore new rooms and they cannot carry items unless the haunt says otherwise. And that is everything you need to know in order to play the second edition of Betrayal at House on the Hill. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. If you want to learn my thoughts on Betrayal at House on the Hill, or if you want to learn how to play more games, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more tutorials, reviews, and unboxings. Thank you all as always so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.